This is your mini lecture on Chapter 9, Substance Use Disorders. What we're going to focus on today is talking a little bit about the criteria of them, how we sort of divide up the different substance use disorders. Then we're going to focus a lot on etiology, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about treatments. So we're going to span sort of the whole chapter, but we're just going to touch on a few little things because there's a lot of details in this chapter. So let's start with this idea of substance use disorders. People used to say that you either had substance abuse or you had substance dependence. These were two different types of disorders. In the new DSM-5, we actually combined them. We found there wasn't a lot of difference between abuse and dependence, so everything now is what we call substance use disorder. Now, depending upon what the substance is that you are addicted to, that will change the name of the disorder. So, if you are addicted to alcohol, then you have alcohol use disorder. If you're addicted to marijuana, you have cannabis use disorder, etc., etc. So we use the same term, we just replace the idea of substance with whatever it is that you're addicted to. And what I really want you to focus on in this chapter is the alcohol use disorder. I think that is the most prevalent one. So that's really where I'd like you to spend the majority of your time if you're studying for the exam. Let's talk a little bit about the criteria. This is the exact same criteria no matter what the substance is. Doesn't matter if it's alcohol, doesn't matter if it's opiates like heroin or something like that. We actually have two main criteria. The most important one, and this is the one that always throws everybody off, is this idea of dysfunction. Remember from Chapter 1 what the definition of dysfunction is. It's either distress, personal distress, or some sort of impairment in your functioning. Something has happened that you are no longer functioning at the level that you should be. So you have to have some kind of dysfunction in your life, number one, to even be considered for substance use disorders. That's because oftentimes number two, sometimes people will actually meet number two fairly easily. There's 11 different symptoms for substance use disorders, and you have to have 2 or more of them in at least 1 year. So something like having a hangover and not getting up and going to your 8 a.m. class would be considered one of the criteria for substance use disorders. So whenever I teach this, I always have students, and I can see it in their head going, holy crap, I've done that a couple times this year, and I've also done this, So one of the other ones is tolerance, being able to drink or use more of the substance, and you have to have more and more of it in order to get the same buzz. So if you've ever drank alcohol, you know that the very first time you drank, maybe one beer, maybe one wine cooler made you go, woo, I'm drunk. But as you build up a tolerance, you need more and more of it to get the same feeling. Tolerance is a criteria. So a lot of my students go, oh, holy crap, I've experienced 2 of those symptoms, definitely experienced them in a year. I have an addiction, not unless it has caused a dysfunction in your life. And so that's really a key part of the criteria for any kind of use disorder. We also have different severities of use disorders because one is not the same as the other. If you are only experiencing 2 to 3 of these symptoms, then you have what we would call a mild disorder. So it's almost as if you classify as having the disorder, but you're sort of at that beginning stages. You're not really chronic yet. You could actually probably reduce your use, pay more attention to sort of what you're doing, and you might not need professional help in that sense. 4 to 5 is moderate. If you have 6 or more of those symptoms, you're severe. You're certainly going to probably need some sort of rehabilitation program in order to get over the use disorder that you have. So that's the criteria that we use, and again, it doesn't matter what the substance is. There's legal substances like alcohol, caffeine, tobacco, all of those are legal substances, but you could have a use disorder from them. And then there's the illegal stuff, so the things like opiates or some amphetamines, things along those lines. So what do I want you to know about all of them? Because there's like 10 of them. Know the basic facts. So if I say opiate, know what I mean when I say opiate. I'm talking about heroin and painkillers. Understand whether or not it's a stimulant, it makes your central nervous system increase, or is it a depressant? It makes your central nervous system decrease, like alcohol. And then know just sort of the basic dangers. So what makes cocaine dangerous? What makes inhalants dangerous? because inhalants, so something like huffing gas or huffing chemicals that you find underneath your sink, can actually completely destroy every system in your body and completely destroy basically your life if you inhale too much. And it's so easy to find because they're readily available. It's one of the most dangerous drugs for teenagers because it's so easy to get and it does so much damage. So know some basic facts about them, things along those lines. But again, we're going to focus a lot on the alcohol use disorder. You will see the exam heavily weighted on that particular disorder. Now let's move on a little bit to etiology. There's some new stuff going on in terms of the biological etiology for use disorders, and so it's a really cool topic right now in abnormal psychology. So I want to talk about two of them, the neurobiological one, that's the really new one, and then the behavioral one, which is really the foundation for most of the treatments that we do for use disorders. So neurobiological new theory says that genetically you have some sort of deficiency in what we call your dopaminergic system, right here. And what this means is dopamine. Dopamine, if you recall, is a neurotransmitter. Dopamine basically is sort of that neurotransmitter that makes you feel good. It's what we call sort of your reward system, your pleasure system. So when things make you feel happy, it's usually because dopamine has been released into your system. So all of this, so a drug becomes a drug because it somehow impacts your dopamine. So just connect those two. So you have a dopaminergic system, which is basically your reward system, You have a pathway in your brain, and there's some charts in the book that sort of is like how the dopamine sort of moves in your brain and how it makes you feel that happiness, that euphoria. So neurobiologically we say that there's some sort of deficiency in that, in the sense that you're just not getting the dopamine that you need. You're not getting the same amounts that other people need. You don't feel internally rewarded in the same way. So when something good happens, you don't get that same amount of high that other people get. So you actually need more of what we call external reward, because for whatever reason your brain is not producing enough dopamine. And that external reward comes in the form of a drug. If you take drugs, it's going to release more dopamine, and so you're actually going to supplement what you are genetically missing with that chemical. We kind of do this all the time, right? Oftentimes the drugs the doctors give us sometimes are a supplement for what our body's not naturally doing. So if you have diabetes and your body is not naturally producing the amount of insulin that it needs, we supplement it with other insulin, and that helps keep your glucose levels in line. It's the same sort of mechanism, except you're doing drugs of some kind in order to supplement. And the problem with that is that your body gets used to those supplements. They get used to having that artificial drug come in and actually do the work that it needs to do. And then your body gets lazy, your brain gets really lazy, and it stops producing the normal dopamine that it would. So this then becomes a vicious cycle where you have less and less dopamine, less and less rewards are being produced, and so you actually then have to control your brain through the use of these alternative supplements, these drugs. And so that's where addiction comes from. So I actually used to work in a adolescent rehabilitation center, and I knew kids that they couldn't wake themselves up unless they had that drug because their body became dependent upon that drug to actually make it function. So that's the neurobiological sort of etiology in a nutshell. The behavioral etiology is also a good one. It works under this idea of positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. So actually both of them are working at the same time. And if you're not sure the difference between those two, go back to chapter 1. This is the behavioral theory. Positive reinforcement says that after something happens, if you get positively reinforced, you will increase that behavior. Negative reinforcement says that something bad is happening, and once you do something, that bad thing will be taken away, so that's how that behavior gets increased. So the very first time you use drug, it's positive reinforcement. I used the drug, I took the hit of cocaine, and I felt euphoric, I felt great, I felt amazing. So therefore, why wouldn't I use it again? The fact that I felt euphoric reinforces my drug use. Cocaine is awesome. The continued use, once you've used it a couple of times, or for some drugs like heroin, you can actually get addicted the first time. is actually based upon negative reinforcement, not positive reinforcement. Because if your body becomes addicted to it, you have what we call withdrawal symptoms. And again, there's different withdrawal symptoms for different drugs, but they can be really intense and really, really negative. So again, people addicted to something like heroin, their body might be trembling, they might be sweating, they feel physically ill when they don't have heroin in their body. And so in order to get rid of those, they have to use the drug. So that's actually a negative reinforcement cycle. I'm taking away the withdrawal symptoms by using the drug. And so the withdrawal symptoms then actually go down, and I will continue to use drugs because I know that I want to starve off all of those awful, horrible withdrawal symptoms. Most drugs will have withdrawal symptoms. For most of us, we can relate to caffeine. If you have had a time in your life where, for whatever reason, you just started using caffeine more, you drank a lot of pop or you drank a lot of coffee, and then all of a sudden you sort of quit taking that caffeine, you probably had like a caffeine headache, you probably had a caffeine crash, probably had some fatigue. Those were all withdrawal symptoms. And we know that in order to get rid of them, you either have to wait it out so your body gets back to equilibrium, or you take a little bit of caffeine and it will actually make those symptoms go away. So we experience withdrawal symptoms when it comes to caffeine, or if anybody is a smoker, you know the withdrawal symptoms you get when you haven't had a smoke in a while. That's that negative reinforcement loop that people have when they have drugs. So finally, really briefly, in terms of treatments, most of the treatments are cognitive behavioral. They do talk a little bit about some of the behavioral treatments in there as well, but most of the time you're going to see cognitive behavioral ones, and there's tons of them. That's what I wanted to point out, is that there's lots of different ways of providing cognitive behavioral treatment for some sort of use disorders. So any self-help program, AA, rational recovery, things like that. There's these things called contingency management, there's aversion therapy, there's skills training, etc. Make sure you understand the difference between them, but they're all based upon this principle of sort of breaking these cycles up here in order to reduce the drug use. Alright, I think that is everything I had for this chapter. Again, if you have questions, make sure that you are posting them up on Moodle, and I will be sure to answer them for you.